If it's Thursday, President Biden is in isolation after testing positive for COVID-19 as the administration faces yet another test amid a brutal stretch of challenges and setbacks. What we know about the president's diagnosis and where things go from here in just a moment. Plus, 187 minutes, former President Trump's actions and inactions during that more than 3-hour raid under scrutiny. What legal experts are watching for when the January 6th committee holds its most high-stakes public hearing yet in prime time. And later, Ukraine's First Lady speaks to NBC News in an exclusive interview as her husband leads her nation through war back home. Her message to America nearly 150 days since Russia invaded Ukraine. All ahead. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker. We begin with the very latest from the White House, where President Biden is now in isolation after testing positive for COVID. According to the White House's physician, the president, who is fully vaccinated and twice boosted, tested positive this morning as part of his routine screening process. He's been prescribed the COVID antiviral Paxlovid. In a video message released by the White House this afternoon, the president said he was experiencing only mild symptoms so far. Take a look.
But I'm doing well. I'm getting a lot of work done. I'm going to continue to get it done. And in the meantime, thanks for your concern and keep the faith. It's going to be okay.
The tweet came shortly before the White House's COVID response coordinator, Dr. Ashish Jha, spoke to reporters, saying he expected President Biden will continue to have mild illness and that the president should return to his normal schedule after 5 days of isolation if he tests negative. Dr. Jha was also asked about concerns due to the president's age.
He's 79 years old. What level of concerns does that add when someone like him tests positive?
Very simply, I would begin with what's his immune status and what are his access to treatments. And the bottom line is, given how much immunity he has from vaccines, given that he was started on treatments right away, like literally at symptoms this morning, got started on Paxlovid this morning, I think all of those things very dramatically reduce his risk of serious illness. And that's really the goal here, is to prevent serious illness, to keep that risk as low as possible. I think he's gotten that full set of protections.
A White House official telling NBC News the residence has been reduced to essential staff only while the president isolates there. Meanwhile, First Lady Jill Biden, who was in Detroit this morning, has tested negative but is considered a close contact. Her office says she is following CDC guidance with regards to masking and social distancing, but kept her schedule with events in Michigan and Georgia. And Vice President Harris, who was last with the president on Tuesday, tested negative as well this morning, according to her office. She also kept her schedule for today and told an audience in North Carolina the president was in good spirits and feeling well when she spoke with him this morning. Right now, the president's literal isolation in Washington is perhaps an apt metaphor for the political challenges facing him, as his diagnosis comes amid plummeting poll numbers and doubts from within his own party about his age, his viability, and his electability. It's also a reminder, folks, that more than a year and a half into his presidency, the pandemic remains ever present in our daily lives. That is for sure. Joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli and Dr. William Schaffner, a CDC advisor and a professor of preventive medicine and infectious diseases at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Thanks so much to both of you for being here. Mike, I have to start with you. Bring us up to speed here. What is the latest on the president's diagnosis? And of course, we all watched that White House briefing. What were your key takeaways?
Well, Kristen, the word from across the White House is that the president is doing well and that the White House itself is proceeding, as Dr. Jha put it, the president is working comfortably, not necessarily resting comfortably. This is a moment White House officials have stressed they've been prepared for. As soon as the president was tested today, receiving that initial positive test, it was confirmed with a PCR test. And then they set into motion a plan that had been in the works for quite some time. starting with a steady stream of public information that they wanted to emphasize transparency. We heard from the First Lady very soon after we first learned of the president's diagnosis. We heard from the vice president later in the day. And then we saw Dr. Jha at the podium joining Karine Jean-Pierre after we received a detailed statement from Dr. Kevin O'Connor. Now, of course, the president's symptoms are going to be closely tracked, as you would expect. But the White House using this as something of a teachable moment, reminding the country that, yes, we are at a very different place now than we were when the last President Trump, tested positive for COVID, a time before vaccines and before the kind of treatments the president himself is receiving right now. Now, Kristen, it's worth underscoring, though, yesterday marked the exact 1.5-year mark of the Biden administration, and so much of late, this administration has felt like it is just under siege, under the weight of a number of economic challenges, global crises, and infighting even among the Democratic Party. And this couldn't have come at a worse time because they were just at the point where they felt like they were going to begin fighting back. The president yesterday, in fact, on the road, part of a more robust travel schedule. He was supposed to be on the road today in Pennsylvania doing fundraising events as well as a public event on his gun safety law that he just signed into law. Next week, he was scheduled to hold his first event for a political event for the midterm elections. And so in that respect, the timing really biting the White House here at an unfortunate time.
Oh, that is so right, Mike, and I'm so glad that you raise that point. I want to ask you about some of what wasn't answered in the briefing and the tone of it. At some moments, it seemed almost as though the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, was a little bit defensive, asked about how many close contacts the president may have had, asked about whether he came into contact with anyone who's tested positive in recent days, and then notably was asked where the president got it from, and she responded by saying that doesn't matter. What matters is that he's recovering, his symptoms are mild. Talk a little bit about what remains to be learned in this. And Mike, obviously you and I have our work cut out for us covering this president in the next several days as he recovers.
It's not been a dull moment in that 1.5 years of this administration so far, Kristen. Yes, I think you're right. It was really interesting because this was probably for most Americans the first time they see Karine Jean-Pierre at the podium as the press secretary. She has not had, in the 2 months she's been in office, a moment like this where the broadcast networks, including cable networks as well, were showing that briefing. And there was a bit of defensiveness at times. Dr. Jha had to come in at points to sort of clarify elements of the timeline, for instance, of when the president began feeling symptoms that were notable. I think the biggest question is about where the president may have been contracted this virus, of course, coming so soon after he returned from a high-stakes Middle East trip, but also who else now may be close contacts of the president and where this cases might be spreading within the White House and elsewhere, given how many people were traveling with him just yesterday, Kristen.
All right. Well, great reporting as always. Mike Memley, good to see you. Dr. Schaffner, I want to turn to you now. Talk about the prognosis for someone the president's age with his medical history. Of course, the White House stressed he is vaccinated. He is twice boosted. They use this moment to reiterate and underscore how important it is that you get vaccinated. But what are the concerns here, assuming this may be the BA.5 variant?
Well, Kristen, obviously there are concerns because the president is 79 years old, but he's an otherwise healthy 79-year-old. And we would anticipate that the prognosis would be excellent. As you say, he has been vaccinated and twice boosted, and the last booster was just fairly recently. So his immune system should be well stimulated. And in addition, very promptly, he received, once the diagnosis was made, Paxlovid. This is, of course, the antiviral medication. It begins to fight the virus right away. The immunity from the vaccine plus Paxlovid, they are both combining to help keep him out of the hospital. That's what they're designed to do, to keep this a, relatively speaking, minor illness. Not that any illness to a president is truly minor, but in that context, he now has a runny nose, he has an occasional hacking cough, and he has some fatigue. These are very common symptoms as this new variant, likely BA.5, spreads. It can infect people who are previously vaccinated and people who've had previous COVID. but it generally produces, relatively speaking, mild disease. So fingers crossed, but all things should go rather well.
Yeah, Democrats and Republicans and everyone else keeping their fingers crossed that he has a very speedy recovery. Dr. Schaffner, let me ask you about Paxlovid, the antiviral. You heard Dr. Jha get questions about the possibility of a rebound. He said, look, that only happens in a very small percentage of the cases. I believe he said about 5%. But what are the concerns around someone having a rebound, particularly someone who's 79 years old?
Well, what happens, and it happened to Dr. Tony Fauci just a couple of weeks ago, is that the Paxlovid interferes with the multiplication of the virus, suppresses the virus, and then after the 5-day course of therapy, some of those viruses are still hanging around, and they wake up again, and they can produce some symptoms. These are usually brief, really quite self-limited, and most people go on and get rid of those symptoms fairly promptly. So it's not a matter of concern so much as a matter of interest.
Does the president have any increased risk, very quickly, Dr. Schaffner, for long COVID?
Well, long COVID can follow any COVID infection, but we hope that, the incidence is very low, and it occurs more frequently among younger people than older persons. So once again, fingers crossed, everything going well.
Yes, indeed. Dr. Schaffner, thank you so much for your great information. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Joining me now, our panel, Liz Smith, Democratic strategist and also author of the new book, Any Given Tuesday, and former Florida Congressman and an NBC political analyst, Carlos Curbelo. Thanks to both of you for being here. Really appreciate it. Liz, let me start with you. What did you make of the White House briefing? The White House clearly trying to stress the point, look, the president has a very mild form of this right now, some coughing, sniffles, and also trying to use it as a teachable moment. Is this the right messaging?
Yeah, it is absolutely the right messaging, and it's the opposite, frankly, of the messaging that we heard out of the Trump administration when President Trump got COVID. So look, we all know that COVID is here to stay, unfortunately, and that it's important for us to all be vigilant, to continue to get boosters, but to realize that, even for the president, who is 78 years old, that it is just causing a minor cold. So I thought that, I know Karine was pressed, I know Karine very well, but I think that she handled it well, and that the White House messaging on this has been spot on.
But Liz, let me ask you a little bit about that, because they did come to the podium. They got a number of questions. Where did the president get this? How many close contacts has he had? Those are among the questions that we still don't have answers to. Now, obviously, we are just hours into President Biden testing positive for COVID. But were you concerned by the lack of answers on some of those key questions?
No, frankly, I'm concerned by the focus on those questions, because who cares? They'll figure this out. But I don't know about you. I've had COVID. Most of my friends have had COVID. It's hard to figure out right away who your close contacts are. All that matters is that the president has COVID. He's been open about it. He's been open about how he's treating it, and he's encouraging the American people to learn from it.
Carlos, jump in here, and if you could specifically respond to the points that Liz is making here, but also to her initial comment about, look, they are aiming to have more transparency than the Trump administration. At least at the outset, they have said that is their goal.
Well, Kristen, I think pretty much every administration has been more transparent than the Trump administration. But look, I think it's important for the White House to understand that even though we are still in the middle of this pandemic, most of the country has moved past this pandemic. You look at the polling, I mean, this is not what people care about. So I think the best thing they can do is, if the president feels good after a few days, I guess 5 days is what's recommended now, he should get out there, get back to work, start traveling, and show the American people that they don't have to live under this COVID cloud anymore, that companies can continue bringing back their employees to the office and help reignite some of these downtown communities that have been run down by this pandemic. That's really what this White House needs if they want to get out of this political rut, which I think really started because people got so frustrated that the pandemic has been so persistent, and that some governments, not anymore, but some state and local governments were also persistent about keeping people away from offices and all these mandates. I mean, people have moved past that, and I think it's important for this White House to show that they can move the president quickly past this infection as long as he feels good and is healthy.
And let me just say,
Liz, your take on that, and go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, no, I was about to say I completely agree with that message. And it would be great to see the president out there in the coming days to show that, it isn't the end of the world and that we cannot live in perma fear of COVID. And from all indications, we've heard that he does plan to have an active schedule where, of course, he's not going to be surrounded by throngs of people, but he's going to be doing that. And it is an important message to send, especially because we do know politically that one of the reasons why his numbers have been hurting is that people are still feeling the pain of the pandemic.
Well, and just big picture for both of you, and Carlos, I'll start with you and then go to you, Liz. I mean, how would you assess the White House's handling of COVID? Here we are. We have a new variant. Cases are on the rise again. I hear what you're saying, Carlos. People are ready to move on. In fact, a number of people are moving on, doing exactly that. Does the White House messaging today, get vaccinated, get boosted, get double boosted, if you are eligible for that, does that resonate with people, or are they tuning this out to some extent?
Kristen, those messages are important, but I think the White House has to be aware of how the Democratic Party has been perceived during this pandemic. Democrats have been associated, whether fairly or not, and in some cases it has been fair, with school closures, with shutdowns, with mandates, with warnings, while some Republicans, and in some cases they've been irresponsible, and in some cases they did it too early, but they have talked about reopening and keeping schools open. And so that's the political reality. And that's one of the reasons why the president's numbers are so low. And by the way, one of the reasons why we have inflation. We have production issues, supply line issues. Why? Because a lot of people aren't going to work. All of this has had an impact. And unfortunately for Democrats, they're associated with a lot of the negative aspects of the pandemic. And this is an opportunity for the White House to say, look, because of the work we've done, no one should live in fear anymore. If you get infected, it's okay. 5 days later, you'd be perfectly fine, living your life normally. You don't have to wear a mask. Your kids don't have to wear a mask. Move on. That is the most powerful message this White House could send right now.
And Carlos, it seems like that's exactly the message the White House is trying to make. Liz, talk broadly about the politics, because Carlos delved into it, the fact that Democrats have gotten painted with this brush, as he says, school closures, etc. This was a moment when President Biden was trying to ramp up his travel, when he was trying to be more engaged heading into the midterms, when he was trying to really tout what he sees as some of his key accomplishments. Today, he was supposed to be in Pennsylvania talking about the bipartisan gun legislation that was passed. Could this have come at a worse time for President Biden?
Well, look, nobody expects a Spanish Inquisition, and nobody expects when they're going to get COVID. It happened. He's going to be off the campaign trail for a few days. I don't think that this is going to have any long-term effects on his political standing. But I am in complete agreement with Carlos that it is important that the White House signal that the days of school closures, the days of mask mandates are long past us. There is absolutely no question that Democrats have paid a political price for school closures. We certainly saw that in the Virginia gubernatorial election. Now, the governors who did these things, they didn't have all the facts at their disposal. No one had dealt with a global pandemic like this at the time, but they did unfairly fairly or not, get blamed with it. And we need to move past that and show that the president is leading us forward away from those policies and encouraging people to take steps to get vaccines, to avoid crowded places if they are compromised, so that they themselves don't contract COVID.
All right. Well, this was just a great conversation and a great way to really talk about the politics at the backdrop of all of this. It's also one of those moments when Democrats and Republicans are speaking out, saying that they are sending good wishes to the president, hoping for his very speedy recovery. Liz and Carlos, thanks so much to both of you. Coming up, tonight's primetime hearing, the January 6th committee set to detail minute by minute more than 3 hours of the former president's inaction amid chaos at the Capitol. What to watch for and why it matters both legally and politically, that's next. Plus, could Donald Trump himself or Vice President Pence be asked to testify? What one January 6th committee member told NBC News about that, and the work still ahead for the committee. You're watching Meet the Press now. We're back after a quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Turning to the other major story today, the final scheduled hearing for now from the January 6th Select Committee tonight in prime time. The focus, the 187 minutes between the time President Trump delivered his speech at the Ellipse, encouraging his supporters, some of them armed, to march to the Capitol, to when he finally put out a video asking rioters to leave. In a video released by committee member Adam Kinzinger this morning, we heard members of Trump's inner circle saying in various depositions the president spent that time watching television. NBC's Ali Vitale talked exclusively to committee member Elaine Luria, who said tonight's hearing will paint a picture of inaction from the former president.
You know, he was seeing the violence. He learned of it right when he got back to the White House. And, you know, if you were president, wouldn't you just jump into action? Wouldn't you call everyone in your administration, your cabinet, who could, you know, come in and help quell this and monitor the situation carefully? He really sat in relative isolation and didn't take action, even at very strong urging of the people around him.
It all comes as sources tell NBC News the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General has launched a criminal investigation into the circumstances surrounding the destruction of Secret Service text messages that may have been relevant to the January 6th investigation. Joining me now to break down all of this and to preview tonight is NBC's Ali Vitale on Capitol Hill. Ali, great to see you. You've been doing some really great reporting on all of this. And as we've been saying, tonight's focus, those 187 minutes, what the former president did or did not do. What are you going to be watching for? What can we expect?
Yeah, Kristen, I've had really great reporting partners over the course of these hearings, you included, of being able to tease out some of the things that are finally going to come to a head tonight in these hearings, which really are the culmination of the last 7 hearings. All of these disparate threads of pressuring the vice president, pressuring at the state level, pressuring inside the Department of Justice, all culminating now on January 6th. And Congresswoman Luria previewed this. They are going to not just show that the former president was sitting in the dining room watching television, but they are going to show, in part, clips from Fox News, things that the former president may have actually been watching himself. And you and I know that every single network that day was tuned in and showing all of the chaos, all of the violence that was happening here on Capitol Hill, further illuminating the fact that the former president was watching it all unfold and doing nothing. In fact, in the words of Congressman Kinzinger, Trump was sitting there watching gleefully. But it's not just that he was watching gleefully that the committee is going to try to show here. The words that I've heard over and over again from members of this committee are dereliction of duty. Now, there are moral and legal implications to that. And on the legal front, you and I have been teasing out what the former top White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, might say. The idea that while he's been reticent to talk about his direct conversations with Trump, he has not been shy in sharing his opinions of things that were going on in that White House. And we know from other witnesses that he had deep concerns both about the president's desire to go to the Hill that day, but also the idea that the president wasn't doing enough, and he was sharing that with other senior members of the White House. That's going to be one of the legal things that they may try to show, that Trump knew there were legal concerns around his inaction, but then also the moral ones. The fact that the Capitol of the United States, just a few blocks away from where the president was sitting, was under attack, people holding Trump flags, Trump signs, and he was still doing nothing over the course of 3 hours to quell it.
Yeah, it promises to be incredibly emotional and dramatic, according to committee members. And I know you spoke to one of them, Elaine Loria. She is going to be one of the committee members leading tonight's proceedings. And I know you spoke with her about what happens next. This investigation is still going on, right?
Yeah, it's still going on. I think the words that she used to me is we still have a lot left to do. That doesn't sound like a committee that is in its final phases of hearings. We know that they had an arc laid out for these hearings at the very beginning. They frankly stuck to it pretty well, except for that one emergency session with Cassidy Hutchinson. But now they're at the end of their timeline. They will show us what happened on January 6th. And now it's a question of what more they get. There's the potential, for example, that when they release their final report, they're going to do a hearing around that. There could be a pre-final report. They could do it in stages. That's something that the chairman of the committee said they are now actively talking about and maybe have even decided on. But there's also a world in which, Kristen, this could go straight through next January. And I say January because it depends what happens in November. If Republicans retake the chamber, this committee doesn't exist anymore. They could very much run right through the tape if they have the information that warrants that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And they're signaling that that is a real possibility. Allie, one of the people who I anticipate we're going to hear a lot about tonight is Mark Meadows. We know that he was one of the very few people who was speaking to former President Trump on that day. I was texting with him, asking if the president was going to come out and make remarks. And I know that our Hill team caught up with him. I want to play a part of that and then get your reaction on the other side.
Do you have any response to Cassidy Hutchinson?
Have you spoken to Cassidy Hutchinson before or after her testimony?
As I said, I don't comment on anything on January 6th, guys. I appreciate the job you're doing.
Mr. Meadows, we've seen the behind-the-scenes footage. We've seen your texts in real time. Is there anything you want to say about those 187 minutes and that day?
Obviously, I'm not commenting on anything on January 6th.
Yeah, extraordinary work there, I believe, by our Haley Talbot, pressing Mark Meadows. We know the committee wants to hear from Mark Meadows. He is not sitting down and talking with them, right, Allie?
Not talking to them or our colleagues, apparently, though I will say it's a sharp contrast for anyone who's covered Mark Meadows, both during his time in the White House and up here on Capitol Hill. This is a man who, when the former president had COVID, he was talking to reporters off the record, but on camera outside of Walter Reed. I mean, he's someone who was always media savvy, if not media friendly. So the fact that he would hear all of those questions and only give one answer to say no comment feels like a departure, but also speaks to the climate here, the fact that he does not want to be talking about January 6th.
I think you're absolutely right. And yet I think there will be a number of mentions of him tonight. Ali Vitale, thank you so much. I know we're all gearing up for a late one. Appreciate it. Coming up next, crime and consequences, what legal experts are watching for in tonight's primetime January 6th hearing as the committee lays out what exactly the president did and did not do during the insurrection. You're watching Meet the Press now.
And the tweet said something to the effect that Mike Pence, the vice president, didn't have the courage to do what should have been done. I read that tweet and made a decision at that moment to resign. That's where I knew that I was leaving that day once I read that tweet.
Welcome back. That was former President Trump's former Deputy National Security Advisor Matthew Pottinger testifying in a taped deposition about his breaking point on January 6th that led him to resign. As we've said, Pottinger is slated to be one of the live witnesses at tonight's primetime January 6th committee hearing. Pottinger, along with former White House Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Matthews, could also be one of the last witnesses the American public hears from before the committee begins writing its report and makes any potential criminal referrals to the Department of Justice. Joining me now to break down all of the potential legal implications of tonight's hearing, I'm joined by two of our NBC News legal analysts, defense attorney Danny Cevallos and former senior FBI and former U.S. Attorney Chuck Rosenberg. Thanks so much to both of you for being here. Really appreciate it. So I just want to set the table here with both of you. We're going to hear from Matt Pottinger. We're going to hear from Sarah Matthews. We know we're going to hear more taped testimony from Pat Cipollone, who I am told we will hear him press Mark Meadows and others, basically making the case the president needs to do more in these critical moments as they watch that attack unfold. So, Chuck, let me start with you. What will you be watching for tonight?
Yeah, I'm curious about what the president didn't do for 187 minutes. I mean, we know that he tweeted occasionally. We know that he watched television. And we understand that he occasionally throws his Big Mac and fries against the wall. But what were people saying to him? And what was he saying back to them? And why didn't he step up to the moment? Very generally, Kristen, dereliction of duty is not a crime. There are exceptions. There's an exception in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I can think of an exception or two in the Federal Criminal Code. But dereliction of duty, as Ali said just a few minutes ago, tends to be a moral failing and not a violation of the criminal law. But who was with him? What did they say to him? What did he say in return? What does the timeline or the tick-tock look like of those 187 minutes?
Danny, Chuck makes an important point about what dereliction of duty means and what it does not mean. And tonight, the committee is trying to lay out the case that there was a dereliction of duty based on all of our reporting. What specifically will you be watching for as it relates to that case that they're building, potentially of a moral failing of this president?
The same thing Chuck is looking for and everybody else is looking for. What was President Trump doing for those 187 minutes? When the smoke clears after tonight, the answer may be, well, pretty much what we already knew he was doing, because maybe there just isn't a lot of information out there about what happened in that private dining room. Or maybe there is a lot of information, more people telling him that he should act. But at the end of the day, that may not be enough because, as Chuck already pointed out, this is a situation where he doesn't have a duty, even if you look at him as a law enforcement, the chief law enforcement officer for the District of Columbia, which in a way, under the unitary theory, probably you could say that he is. But even if he was, we don't hold law enforcement responsible for failing to act. It's only when they act in a grossly negligent manner then we consider them liable. But if there is no affirmative duty to always prevent crime, then we can't hold the president to that same standard, absent some information that he somehow encouraged it. If that emerges, then it crosses the line from mere inaction to doing something affirmative to further this attack.
Well, you lead me to my next question for both of you. I've spoken to both of you as we've watched all of these hearings. This will be the 8th one, about connecting the dots to former President Trump legally. That smoking gun that would say he crossed from a moral dereliction of duty to actually engaging in something that was illegal. Chuck, what would you need to see? What would you need to hear to say, aha, that is a smoking gun in a legal argument?
Well, as a former federal prosecutor, I haven't seen a smoking gun yet. By the way, we almost never see smoking guns. You find those in movies and on television, Kristen, but typically not in real life. What you do in real life, as you said, is take little bits of information. I don't really use the connect the dots analogy, but you take bits of information, direct evidence, circumstantial evidence, things that people around the president have heard and will tell you, and you see whether or not, in Danny's words, and he's exactly right, it crosses the line. Remember, the committee doesn't have to prove anything to anyone, and they don't have the authority to charge anybody with anything. But a federal prosecutor would have to prove the case unanimously and by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And a lot of that would hinge on proving intent. So what the president knew and what the president said becomes absolutely crucial. Smoking guns are on television, Kristen. They're not often found in real life, occasionally so. I wish I had more of them when I was a prosecutor. But I'm looking for those bits and pieces that you can assemble together to paint a more fulsome portrait of what the president understood, what he wanted, and what he did.
Let me shift now to these missing text messages. We learned just today from our Julia Ainsley, the DHS Inspector General is now opening a criminal investigation into the deleted Secret Service text messages. Secret Service apparently got 3 different warnings to save their data. Secret Service says there was nothing malicious here. This was a part of a data overhaul that happens regularly with some consistency. But Danny, talk to me about this. How big of a deal is this?
It is a big deal, but I have to tell you, in your run-of-the-mill investigations, I can't tell you how often there was no videotape in the camera or it was deleting itself every 30 minutes. I mean, going to try and get evidence that should be there digitally and for whatever reason isn't happens a lot more often than you might think. So this might just be a case of galactic incompetence, but not rising to the level of criminality. But I'm not saying that there isn't necessarily something wrong there. But the challenge is that a lot of times the things we set up to search for digital evidence fail us anyway. And this may be just another example of that.
Chuck, we have less than a minute, but quickly, how does an investigation like this work?
Well, first of all, Danny's right. You often don't have the evidence you hope to have. Second, Kristen, if you and I were texting with one another and somebody wanted to see it and it had been deleted, there's a bunch of ways you might be able to recover it. But remember this, you also would have the 2 of us as witnesses. So to Danny's point, you don't always get the evidence you hope to find, but there are other ways by asking people questions you can determine what happened.
All right. Great conversation. Danny Cevallos, Chuck Rosenberg. Thank you so much. I know you'll be up late watching with all of us. Coming up next, how one Republican candidate went from local news anchor to election denier and what it tells us about the fight for the future of the party. That story after a very quick break. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. Welcome back. As much of the Republican Party has been dramatically remade in former President Trump's image, so have some Republican candidates in recent elections. We've seen a number of candidates undergo political 180s, from moderate to MAGA. Among the most high-profile, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, elected as a moderate. She then became one of the former president's most fervent defenders in his first impeachment trial. She didn't just win re-election, she became the number 3 Republican in the House. And on the campaign trail in this year's Pennsylvania Senate race, Dr. Mehmet Oz's political revolution was a point of contention in his primary as his Republican rivals questioned his MAGA bona fides, even after he won the endorsement of Mr. Trump himself. And now the Republican primary for Arizona governor. Another Trump endorsee is in the spotlight for her political evolution, from a mainstream figure to a MAGA conservative. NBC's Vaughn Hillyard joins me with his reporting on Kari Lake's evolution. So, Vaughn, break it all down. What can you tell us about this?
Well, Kristen, you just named off a few of these candidates, of these political figures who have become defining ones in this Republican Party. But so often the question that not only do we talk about, but also voters, when they're even trying to judge the authenticity of these individuals, is this an act, or have they really evolved in this transformative, radical ways? Take a look at Kari Lake's journey.
You're watching the best.
We begin with the Fox 10 News Alert.
Kari Lake used to be known in Arizona as a charismatic newscaster.
He's a lion. Hear him roar.
A staple on Phoenix TVs for more than 2 decades. But then,
I'm Kari Lake, and I'm running for governor.
It seemingly all changed.
These media giants.
Last summer, she separated from the TV station to run for office.
The media isn't just corrupt, they are anti-American.
She is now one of Trump's closest allies.
Kari Lake, I'll tell you, she is incredible.
And promoters of 2020 election conspiracy theories.
Anybody who was involved in that corrupt, shady, shoddy election of 2020, lock them up.
It's kind of difficult to understand that it's her, the same person that was the person that I knew before she became a candidate.
Former Governor Jan Brewer, a staunch conservative herself, now puzzled by Lake.
But she never seemed an extremist, like what we're seeing now is when she's running for office for the governor.
Brewer now endorsing Lake's GOP primary opponent, as is current Governor Doug Ducey and former Vice President Mike Pence.
I do more than talk for a living.
I think that if Kari Lake continues down the path that she's going, if she should win the primary going into a general, she'll never be able to win the general, and therefore we will lose the election to a Democrat, to a liberal Democrat. It's as simple as that.
We spoke with 12 of Lake's one-time close friends and colleagues. They asked for anonymity, several of them saying they feared being targeted, but each of them said her transformation was gradual.
I'm Kari Lake with a look at your...
In 2015, several of her friends we spoke to say she found Trump to be funny and defended his crassness. She began spreading internet conspiracy theories.
You can take the hydroxychloroquine as a preventative.
And then she refused to acknowledge Biden as the winner of the 2020 election. One thing that hasn't changed, according to Lake's former colleagues, her stubborn, combative style.
You were her HR manager.
Yes.
How was she to work with when there was tension?
She wouldn't work with you. She would leave. Kari wants what Kari wants. That's what she wants.
Barbara Seville, Arizona's most prominent drag queen, befriended Lake about 20 years ago.
I was kind of starstruck when I saw her the first time. I was like, oh my God, there's Kari. And we became friends.
But last month, during Pride Month, Lake tweeted, "They kicked God out of schools and welcomed the drag queens. They took down our flag and replaced it with the rainbow."
I'm a friend of yours for 20 years, and I'm disposable now.
Could I ask you one question here?
Lake declined requests for an interview. When we caught up with her, she said that she had no interest in talking.
How has Kari Lake evolved here? What would you tell those people who were close to you in their life that are wondering who that Kari Lake is now? You were friends with these people, and they say they don't recognize the person you've become.
With a lot of people in the media. I've worked in the media for 30 years, and I'm sorry if they can't handle somebody being conservative. Thank you very much.
Now, that's where this August 2nd primary, just a week and a half from now, is so intriguing, because it'll give us a better understanding of where this electorate is and whether Republican voters en masse have shifted and evolved to this election denialism that Kari Lake, a part of the party that she is now a part of here. Kari Lake is going up against Karen Taylor Robson, who is also a new name to politics. And in fact, tomorrow, Donald Trump is going to be holding a rally with Kari Lake, while current Governor Doug Ducey, as well as former Vice President Mike Pence, Kristen, they're going to be holding campaign events with Karen Taylor Robson, Kari Lake's opponent here. And that is where, when you're talking about humans who are in such elevated positions like this here, there's a lot of layers to it. But ultimately, that question that still is on the forefront of folks' minds is this the real Kari Lake? And just exactly how did she evolve like this?
So much that's fascinating about it, this proxy battle between former President Trump, former Vice President Mike Pence. And you did an extraordinary job, Vaughn, laying out her evolution, and you got her to talk in the end. Way to go, Vaughn. Thank you for that.
Thanks,
and still to come, we are going to hear from Ukraine's First Lady, who sat down with NBC News, her message to Congress and America as Ukraine enters its 5th month of war next. You're watching Meet the Press now. You don't want to miss this. Welcome back. Ukraine's First Lady Olena Zelenska delivered powerful remarks to members of Congress yesterday, making a personal appeal for more weapons and more air defense systems to protect families in Ukraine and to push back against Russia's assault. Her first visit to D.C., where she met with the Bidens as well as other administration officials, comes as we approach the 5-month mark since Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine began. While Russian forces were able to claim control over Ukraine's Luhansk region earlier this month, the battle for Donetsk still continues. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, said yesterday it's not lost yet, and Ukrainians are making the Russians pay for every inch of territory that they gain. My colleague NBC's Peter Alexander spoke with the First Lady yesterday. Peter, what more did she share with you?
Hi, Kristen. Good afternoon to you. This was a powerful and really a personal conversation punctuating First Lady Olena Zelenska's visit here to the U.S., her first trip outside Ukraine since the war there began. And we spoke immediately after she addressed members of Congress, receiving a bipartisan standing ovation after sharing moving images of Ukrainian children and adults who have been killed or severely wounded by Russia's relentless assault. I began by asking her why it was so important to speak to those lawmakers in person.
Саме час. It is the right time to get the attention not only of the U.S. politicians, but also the people of the United States of America to what is going on in Ukraine, and to keep the attention of American people.
5 months into this war, do you worry that the world is moving on beyond the war in Ukraine?
We feel the support from the entire world, and I feel that the entire world is supporting us, but it is very important for us that this support doesn't vanish, that you do not lose the drive, that support stays strong, and the speed with which you support us also increases, because every day brings new victims.
Those victims include a young girl whose mother captured her daughter's last moments before the deadly missile strike. First Lady Olena Zelenska shared that she knew that 4-year-old.
You shared the story of a young 4-year-old girl with Down syndrome named Lisa. You met her as part of a Christmas video that you were recording. She was known as Sunny Flower to her family. What made her so special?
There were various children, and altogether 10. We decorated balloons to put them on the Christmas tree at the office of the president. And it was a very warm evening, wonderful atmosphere. And as I said, 10 children altogether. So Lisa was the fastest child among all. She was running all over. So she was putting paint on me, on herself, on cameraman. And when I saw the news, we were all shocked. When I learned what happened, I couldn't even realize that it was her. I simply saw the stroller, that was on the street. But then in the evening, when I realized that it was Lisa, it became a personal strategy. And what absolutely hurt my heart is that the Russian propagandists, they haven't said a single word of excuse, no word of sorrow. We will never forgive them for all these crimes that they commit against our children.
The First Lady says she fears for all of Ukraine's children, including her own 18-year-old daughter Alexandra and 9-year-old son Kirilo.
You're a First Lady, you're a daughter, you're a mom. What has been the hardest part of this war for you personally?
Well, what I feel is that my children are in danger, and of course I'm quite concerned about it. Believe me, all our children are in danger nowadays, but as a mother, of course I'm very much concerned about my children. I'm also concerned that my children live away from their father, and because they cannot feel support of their father, that also is stressful for them. You know that no one in Ukraine lives a normal life today. No one is safe. So we're all concerned about Ukrainian children, about Ukrainian people. Their pain is mine, my pain. And this is another demonstration that we need to finish this war as soon as possible.
She's learned to cope with the danger her husband, President Zelensky, now faces at all times.
When you think about your family's safety, you must always worry about your husband's safety. Do you worry about him each day? No.
No.
Why not?
I try not to think about it. I know that he will be safe. I'm confident that he will be safe, and he must stay strong because he inspires so many people, and he encourages the entire world. So I don't want to think about security measures. I don't want to think that one day he may be in danger, because if you start thinking about it and focus on these issues, you get very scared. And I want us to be in peace and security, and that is why I keep those thoughts away from myself.
Your husband, once a comedian, is now celebrated as one of the most courageous, one of the most brave leaders in the world. Where does he find that strength?
He had always been like that. So when the entire world got surprised by his sudden courage, I was not surprised because I knew that he had always been this way. Just that obstacle that allowed him to reveal his true colors.
В тому, що це наша земля, наша країна,
There are some people who say the only way to end this war will be to do the one thing that your husband, the president, has said he will never do, which is to turn over some land to the Russians. Do you envision that ever happening?
I don't think this is an option, and I also believe that every Ukrainian will disagree with this proposal. You know, I give a very simple example, but the simplicity of this example can explain to people why we believe this way. Imagine there is a thief or a criminal who goes into your house, that starts destroying it, killing your relatives, terrorizes your family, you live in constant state of fear, and then someone comes up with a proposal and says, oh, just give this man a living room and move to a bedroom. You have lots of space. Just live with the thief peacefully in your house. You understand that that is not a way out because the criminal will continue terrorizing you, will continue killing your family. So we believe that we should never agree to that. There might be other ways out, but certainly not this one.
Ms. Zelenska also shared with me a way that Americans can better understand what it's like to live in Ukraine right now, detailing a free app that you can download. It's called Air Alarm Ukraine, that goes off whenever her country is under attack. That siren sound, a constant reminder of the unrelenting assault on her homeland. Really just a poignant conversation. And when you speak to her, Kristen, you can see in her eyes the constant concern for the Ukrainian people.
Yeah, and you could just feel it listening to your extraordinary interview with her. Really, really great work, Peter. Congratulations on that. Thank you for that, Peter, and thank you for being with us this hour. Chuck will be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with my friend Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.